because you can't really budget before you know what you're trying to achieve. And you see that this approach is so broken when you are trying to maximize every dollar in your organization. And that's why I favor the second approach, which is zero-based budgeting. It forces you to think about your team org structure. So finance cannot really create a budget on their own that's going to be any meaningful. We are approaching the season when companies that budget start thinking about budgeting, start planning their budgeting process, start thinking about their next year's goals, start preparing. So I wanted to record this video to talk about budgeting and talk about some of the misconceptions that people may have about business budgeting, and just discuss the budgeting process in general and how it really should be done to maximize the benefit for the business. So a lot of people view budgeting as something that is not necessary. Some companies think that, oh, they're too agile. A lot of things change all the time. New things constantly pop up. They like to make decisions on the go. They constantly try new things, and sticking to a budget is really unrealistic for them. That's what they think. So these companies don't budget, or if they do, they kind of just create a budget and then forget about it and then never look at it again. So it becomes just like, oh yes, we have a budget just for the check mark, in case somebody asks. But they're not really using it, and that defeats the whole purpose. Before we dive into what, when, and how, let's talk about the benefits of budgeting, because I feel like a lot of people don't even know them. The first one is increased accountability. So when you think about the people that spend money within your business, it might be just, a select few that have the authority to actually spend the money. It might be just, with the blessing of the CEO or the CFO or a controller, but it creates a bottleneck basically. But if you give this authority to more people, then you're prone to overspending and people just buying stuff. It becomes messy. So when you create a budget, you actually assign different people to different parts of your budget or your P&L. Your budget always should mirror your P&L. So you take your P&L and you allocate different parts of it, whether it's different individual accounts or different groups, to people called budget owners. And those budget owners become responsible for their part of the budget. And that changes a lot because you get more people in your business that are allowed to spend money or have the authority to do it, but they also become people responsible for those numbers. So they won't just have great power, they will also have great responsibility. And with this responsibility comes accountability. So for example, and that's another superpower of the budget, you create it once, but then you look at it every month at least, because you compare your actual numbers, the actual performance every month, with what you budgeted. And so if you look at something, if you look at the part of your budget and turns out that you budgeted less, for example, for certain types of expenses, but you ended up spending more, you know who to ask, because there's always somebody responsible for that part of the budget. So instead of, CEO or the group of leaders getting a report, whether you do it monthly or annually at the end of the year, which is another topic, but yeah, you should do it monthly. But they get a report and they look at the numbers and they're like, oh shit, we overspent. How come? Who's responsible? Let's dive in. Let's dig deeper. Let's see, whether we needed this, whether we needed that. And so it becomes a tangled mess. But with individual budget owners, there's always this accountability. So you look at the individual part of the budget, you see that the number is different from what was planned. And then you have just one person who you go and ask. And if they are doing their job, which is managing the budget, controlling the spending, then you can go to them and ask them what that was, or was this justified? Did they willfully accept that they're going to overspend because it made sense, or something else happened? But either way, you have somebody to be accountable for this. So that's one benefit. And in addition to that, there's increased accountability for the business overall, but there's also this individual accountability. So it's not just we have a budget as a business and now we're going to stick to it. And if we are drastically over budget, for example, then we should be held accountable. Yes, but also gives you another additional level, one level down, which is somebody who's accountable for a certain part of that budget. Another important benefit of budgeting is if you use it correctly, it lets you reach your goals easier. So what I mean is, at the end of the year, or in Q4, which is what we're approaching now, when companies start budgeting, the beginning of budgeting exercise is actually a good time for them to start asking themselves the right question, which is, what do we want to achieve next year? Can we measure what we want to achieve? So for example, do we want more revenue? Do we want year-over-year growth of a certain percent? Do we want to improve our bottom line? Do we want to expand next year? Do we want to invest in growing our team or opening a new subsidiary? So the business starts thinking, like, budgeting exercise is a good prompt for a business to start thinking about their future, planning the whole next year. So when I say budgeting is not just a finance exercise, I kind of mean two things. I mean that it's not a finance exercise because it's a team exercise. So the whole leadership team, those budget owners, people that you select within your business to, you assign them to be the budget owners, they also become part of this budgeting exercise. But also what I mean is that when you start budgeting, yes, you end up with a financial tool. Budget, mirrors your P&L. It's a bunch of numbers. But during this process, there are so many other problems or planning, a lot of strategic planning that happens for your business that's not even purely financial. But you shouldn't forget that every business decision finds its way in the financials, one way or another, whether it's changes in revenue, changes in spending, investments in anything, increases or decreases. Even if the decision is not financial, it will have a financial impact. And that's why it's also very important to have those budget owners, because this way you're able to tie decision makers with the financials. So you bridge that gap. And it so often exists in organizations, and it really hurts them, because when management is not financially literate, or if management does not fully understand the impacts of their decisions on the final financials of the business, that creates a lot of missed opportunity, I would say. Missed opportunity for growth, for cost savings, and just overall better planning. So when the budgeting begins, it's ideal if the whole group meets, the whole C-suite or leadership group, whoever's in that group, and they just strategize about what they want to do next year. And sometimes you have to choose. Sometimes most of the time, you cannot have it all. So you need to give and take. You need to think about what is the most important. You need to prioritize, and that initial discussion really helps set the goals for the whole year. And only after you talk about those goals, that's when you can finalize the numbers for your budget. Because you can't really budget before you know what you're trying to achieve. Next important aspect of budgeting, important benefit, is not overspending. Because if you think about it, when somebody within the company is not tied to a budgeting responsibility. So for example, you have a VP something, and they are responsible for their department. You can tell them, as a business owner, you can tell them, hey, you obviously need to hire people, you obviously need to purchase the software that you need, you need to invest in training or in certain conferences. So do what you need to do. And we'll discuss it occasionally. And if it gets out of hand, then we'll just pivot. So this person, and they can be super, super responsible. They can be very, very cautious. But without even seeing the data, it's hard for them to understand in the moment, can they even make certain decisions, or what kind of things they should do or not do. For example, they might have a need to hire somebody, and they might have a few options. They might hire somebody who is very expensive and very experienced, and could be more experienced than what they need right now. Or they could hire somebody cheaper who will just get the job done, but they're not going to be as experienced as the first candidate. So this decision is ultimately financial. Well, I mean, it has an impact on financials. And if this hiring manager is responsible for hiring this person, but they're not responsible for the budget, then they might not think about the money. They might just think, oh, it's a no-brainer. This person makes more sense because they're more experienced, and so what if they're more expensive? But if they have this accountability tied to them, they will think about their decisions more. They will be more mindful. So they can sit and analyze, do I really need to spend, 25% more of my budget, which I can allocate somewhere else, on this person? Or do I just hire the cheaper one, just get the job done, and use this money for training the rest of my team so that they can perform at a higher level? That becomes this important mindfulness aspect. So having a budget and being tied to budgeting responsibility, it changes your mindset, and it helps you be a little bit more thoughtful about your decisions. And I hear a lot that people say that budgeting is restrictive. Budgeting does not give me the freedom and flexibility that I need. Well, first of all, budget is not something that is completely set in stone. So if something changes drastically, for example, when we had COVID, I bet you there wasn't any organization in the whole North America, or maybe in the whole world, that ended the year exactly as they planned at the beginning of the year. They had to pivot, and that's fine. When something extraordinary happens, and it does not have to be a global scale disaster. It could be, all of a sudden there's a new opportunity for a major client that you didn't plan for, but you want it, and now you need to expand your team very quickly. You need to hire additional resources. You need to do something that you weren't planning for. That's good for your business. That's fine. And that requires additional investment, but in this case, it makes sense. So go for it. Do it. Budget is not something that restricts you. It's something that helps you. Budget is your guideline and your plan. And also, if you think about the whole breaking out your P&L into different domains for various leaders in your organization to manage, the budget owners, that is a great tool of empowerment, because otherwise they might just be a group of leaders that need to, for every expense, they need to run to the CEO or to the CFO and check with them if they can spend it, or even the other way around. They can just spend and not have any kind of clue in terms of, do they need to spend it, how much they spent already, does it make sense? And then when they have, when they spend some money and they have plans for doing something in the second half of the year, and then all of a sudden they find out in a meeting with the CEO and CFO that, oh, we're actually out of money and we don't know what's going on. Turns out we overspent in the first half of the year, so we'll need to really start saving in the second half of the year and not spend as much. And then, everybody's pissed off and frustrated, and the leaders feel like they cannot do their job because they had those plans, they strategized, they thought that they're going to have this support, the financial support, and then all of a sudden it's cut off from them. But when you budget, they know right at the beginning of the year how the rest of the year is going to play out, what they can spend, what they can do and when. And if you combine it with the monthly budget versus actual reports, this gives them so much visibility into what is going on with their particular team and their particular department, how they're doing in terms of spending. Are they still on track for the remainder of the year? Can they actually spend a bit more? Or should they pivot down a little and spend less because, the business didn't sell as much? They have so much visibility, and that empowers greatly. And that gives them the feeling that they're more in control and they can influence the organization. And when you can measure this influence in the form of the financial numbers, that really helps in decision making. Decision making based on data is really empowering. Another benefit is clear zones of responsibility, and that's something that I already touched upon, but when people in the organization don't have the guardrails, it will inevitably lead to friction. Because sometimes things are not as clear cut as they seem. So, for example, who controls the office stuff? Is it going to be under HR? Is it going to be under finance or operations? Or is it going to be its own separate thing? Who's going to be responsible for the spending, for the office manager, for all of the stuff happening around the office? It's not clear sometimes, and budgeting allows you to assign responsibility and set those guardrails. Or sometimes, it's not clear who's responsible for software, because software is something that the whole organization uses, either at the whole org level or at the department level. And software purchases might be sanctioned by head IT person or by individual department leads. So that's a decision that every organization needs to make, based on what works best for them. But it's a decision they need to make, because people will always come to you and ask for, getting them a new software or subscription, or, they found out about this new amazing tool that they would like to use. If they don't know who to come to, and if there's no proper process for approving this or considering this, and hence no person who will approve the spend for it, this will lead to just missed opportunities, frustration, and a bunch of people being pissed off, to be honest. Oh, and sometimes I find that organizations go the easy route. The easy route meaning anything that has to do with money goes through the head finance person. So if it's a CFO, VP finance, or a controller. So that is not feasible. And I'll tell you why. On the surface, it kind of makes sense. If it's related to money, go to your money person. But does your money person, controller for example, do they know if this tool is truly needed? For example, if you have a designer team and there's this new amazing AI tool that allows you to automate certain parts of your job with amazing quality that is very new on the market and will give you a good competitive advantage, and you will spend less time and in labor costs doing certain things because this tool allows you to automate a lot of parts of your job. That's cost savings, and that's increased happiness and better quality of work for the design team, and frees up their time to do more work or more meaningful work. But a finance person might not know all of this. So if they are responsible for the spending approvals, how would they know if this tool is good or not? Do they get a presentation from the design team highlighting the benefits? It's such a waste. So they either end up approving everything blindly without even knowing if it's needed, and then they get shit, to be honest, for not managing the budget properly and spending too much. Or another extreme, they just not approve it. And who do people go to? Who do they explain that this is really needed? So that is why it's important to have somebody responsible for spending who can fully understand the needs and who can decide if this is something that's needed or something that is not. And finally, another benefit of budgeting is, in addition to strategic thinking for how your organization is going to look like and perform next year, it forces you to think about your team org structure. And when you talk about money, when you assign budget owners, you give them the authority to spend money. So that means that they're responsible for managing anything that falls under their control. So you need to make sure that whatever falls under their control, that they are equipped to manage it. And if they're not, then you need to find somebody else within your org who will be able to do this better. And a lot of times when organizations budget, that prompts the discussions about the org structure. And sometimes they find that there are certain people or departments that are sitting somewhere that it doesn't make sense for them to sit under this person or within this org. They need to be moved. Or even, it's fine right now, but for whatever you planned for next year, it doesn't make sense. So you need to restructure. And you do this restructure before you budget, because this way you fully understand who are the budget owners, what they are responsible for, and what goals as you have for the next year as an organization, and every budget owner will have, that will allow you to get to this final budget. Okay, we covered the benefits of budgeting. So now I want to talk about a couple of approaches to budgeting. One is a traditional approach, which is you look at what you spent last year, you start with these numbers, and then you adjust them. You either plan to increase them or decrease them slightly, and you use last year's numbers as a basis for your next year. This approach is often used by governments or huge organizations, and sometimes when they get closer to their fiscal year, sometimes if you are, I've experienced this as well. If you are in a service business and you have your government clients or big clients from giant organizations, they might come to you and order a lot of services and ask you to bill them before the end of their fiscal year. And the reason why they do this is they're basically trying to maximize their spend, because this is going to be the basis for next year's numbers for them. So if they are low, then that's what they'll get next year. So they're trying to maximize it so that they get more. And you see that this approach is so broken when you are trying to maximize every dollar in your organization. And that's why I favored the second approach, which is zero-based budgeting. With zero-based budgeting, the way it's called is, it assumes that you start with zero, and then you build on top of that zero. You put in all of the costs that you're going to need, and you basically justify every cost. So it's not like you get an umbrella number and then you do what you want with it. You actually plan for what you're going to spend the money on, and you are not going to get more than what you objectively need. And for maximizing profit and maximizing use of each dollar, this approach works really well. And it also works really well with, when having budget owners as well, because this way they are able to look at what they have. For example, if you've budgeted last year and you're budgeting for next year, they can review, well, they do kind of every month, but they can review all at once their spend for each month and what's included in there, and then decide if it's something that they need for next year, if they're going to change it in some way or increase it or decrease it depending on their goals again. So that works really well. And then once you have created the budget, you don't just sit on it. Because, like I said before, sometimes companies, well, they do one of the two things, and both of them are wrong. So the first thing that they do, they create a budget and forget about it. They never look at it again. And if somebody asks, oh yeah, we have a budget for sure, we don't look at it. And the second thing that they do sometimes is they create a budget and then they adjust it every month or every 2 months when something, when new information comes in. Which is also wrong, because you want to compare your actual performance versus what you planned. And if you want something live, like a live model of your best best forecast for your business, just create a forecast. So forecast is different from a budget because forecast is live and you can change it as often as you want. Budget is set in stone, again, unless something major happens that prompts you to rebudget. But budget is locked. So once you've finished budgeting, this is the report that you use to compare your actuals against. You can compare against forecast for sure, but budget is your plan. So you compare against the plan that you had at the beginning of the year. And so the right approach would be to lock the budget in January. When you finalize it fully with your management team, with your finance team, you lock it. And then every month, once the finance team populates all of the financials, all the transactions, issues the financial statements and reports, closes the period, and that's when you, as the whole management group, get to compare what happened during the month and how it aligns or does not align with your budget, with your plan. This is really powerful, and that's the main benefit of having a budget because it allows you to see how you are doing. Are you on par with revenue? Are you spending too much on expenses? It allows you to see sort of live. I know it's not live because you need to close the month before you can see it, but at least you don't have to wait until the end of the year or until, most of the year is gone before you catch that something is wrong. You can already see the trends and you can see the difference against your plan. So you should be either able to explain it or strategize how to change it in the next period. Okay, now let's talk about the budgeting process. When does it start? And how long does it take? So usually it takes maybe 3 months. If you're doing it for the first time, maybe 4. It all depends on your business, on the complexity of your business. But budgeting usually lasts quite a few weeks. And the reason for that is because so many people are involved and so much planning goes into it. You need to have a few iterations of the budget that you create because each individual budget owner is a contributor, and they come up with their versions of the budget that they need, which finance then pieces together into the overall business budget. And if you let the budget owners, and that's usually a good approach, on the first take, you let them ask for everything that they would want. So you see how much they need and how much you are realistically able to give them. So you come up with this first version of the budget, first draft. And then it goes through the revisions because you'll need to shift some numbers around, reshuffle something, adjust something, just to make it work and to make it work for everybody. It is more difficult than just not having a budget at all or having a budget created by the finance team, which is completely useless because they're not able to control anything in the organization besides finance. So they're not responsible for hiring decisions. They're not responsible for software decisions. They're not responsible for how much revenue is getting brought in. They're not responsible for the quality of the delivery and if any money is going to get lost there. So there are a lot of things that finance is not responsible for that the other leaders are responsible for. So finance cannot really create a budget on their own that's going to be any meaningful. So yes, it's easier and quicker for somebody to write a budget in half a day. But if you want it to be meaningful, if you want it to be useful, and if you want it to be a business tool for growth, then you need to invest in it. So in terms of the start date for budgeting, I would say around September, maybe October, and then you finish at some point in January, just because you want the full year finalized and the full year's information available before you can lock in the numbers. In terms of who should be involved, anybody on your leadership team who you want to make responsible for certain parts of the budget. Usually, all of the people reporting to the CEO, you might go a level down on some of them, especially if there's a certain leader that's responsible for a huge part of the business's team. For example, if there's chief operations officer who's responsible for the delivery and for engineering and for design, then they might assign as individual budget owners their reports. So, head of delivery, head of design, head of engineering, and so on, they will be responsible for their own individual parts of the budget, who will then roll into the chief operations officer. But important note, it's very important, once you designate a budget owner, this is their budget to manage. You don't interfere. You as a CEO or a COO, if it's not your budget, don't. Unless they come to you and discuss things with you. You gave them the right, the responsibility, the accountability, you empowered them, let them be. And if you do not trust them, then it's a bigger issue. Now, lastly, in terms of the tools to use, honestly, so far I haven't found a good budgeting tool that will do everything that a business would need and will ensure that there's great collaboration, great flexibility, and all of the features that we would need to use in the process. So I just use Excel. And I know that a lot of people in my profession, a lot of finance professionals who are responsible for budgeting, they also use Excel. Sometimes Google Sheets are used as well. That's fine too. They are a bit less powerful than Excel, but for collaboration, and if your organization uses them mainly, like the Google Suite, that's fine. But what I'm trying to say is, because each organization is different, because you need so much flexibility in terms of which people are going to be responsible, which departments are going to be assigned a budget. Every organization has a different chart of accounts, different P&L structure. There's not really a tool that can do everything for you and give you this level of customization, of flexibility, other than Excel. So you don't have to overcomplicate it, especially if you're doing it for the first time. But the important thing is you go through all the stages. You plan your goals for next year. You plan what you need to achieve or want to achieve. You plan your team org. You plan who the budget owners will be. And then you plan how much they're going to be responsible for revenue and for expenses, how it all fits together into one budget, and then you polish it until it's aligned with your goals and everybody's happy, understands what is needed from them and what numbers they have to play with and how to play with them and their responsibility. I hope this was useful. I can talk about budgeting for days, so this is just a glimpse into the fascinating world of budgeting. I hope it was useful, and I hope you found something new, and I hope you want to try budgeting in your organization just to see how great of a tool it could be and how useful it could be. If you have questions about the budgeting process, or if you have different thoughts about it, let me know in the comments. I'll be curious to see what you guys think, or if you want a deeper dive into any of the things that I mentioned in this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.